in a way, I just want to start with that metta is an imaginative act, isn't it? Metta's an imaginative act. And in a way, I think we have to sort of remember to take our imaginations seriously, and nurture and feed our imaginations. So yesterday I was recommending this play that I watched a few nights ago called The Encounter, with one of the guys I live with, Seb. Seb, do you want to say hello? Seb's here, actually, so I thought I'd introduce Seb.
Hello.
Seb's helping. He was helping set up and then asked if he could sit in. So it's nice to have Seb here. But also the poetry that Maitreya Bandhu was reading, I found very, very moving. And not just the poems, but also the lives of the poets that he was talking about, Elizabeth Bishop and James Merrill and Anthony Hecht, and I can't remember the fourth. So what I mean by that is that what I found moving is that when I heard the poem, it was, Elizabeth Bishop's, for example, The Art of Losing, or One Art as it's called. When I heard that, yes, I was touched by it, but then hearing about her life and how difficult her life had been made the poem much more moving. And suddenly I felt a sense of empathy with her, and then that made me appreciate the beauty of the poem even more. So empathy is an imaginative act, that's what I'm trying to say. And we need to sort of nurture our empathy. Anyway, I'm going to come on to all of that, but that was just a little bit of link from at least my evening yesterday. So yesterday, just to go back to the teaching that I did yesterday morning with you, we started off talking about metta as an ideal, as a transcendent ideal that is goes hand in hand with enlightened wisdom. For an enlightened being, for a Buddha, or for a bodhisattva, an archetypal bodhisattva like Avalokiteshvara, for an enlightened being, the metta would be a spontaneous response to a sense of the interconnectedness of all life. There would be a direct intuitive's not the right word, a direct realization that we're not separate. And that we're not separate not just from other human beings, but we're not separate from all life. And that somehow the whole universe is of the same nature, which is the nature of life. Buddhism tries to avoid substantialism by, it says that there's no essential substance behind phenomena. And yet there does seem to be some sort of urge to life, urge to consciousness. Bhante talks poetically about that as cosmic going for refuge, and that's not a metaphysical teaching, not a philosophical teaching, that not something one can take literally, but it's a poetic vision that I believe Bhante was connected with, which is that it's as if the cosmos, the whole cosmos, is moving towards the manifestation of greater and greater consciousness in form. And Buddhahood is the sort of pinnacle of the cosmos realizing itself, reality realizing itself in form. I don't know what that means, but I feel moved when I sort of remember that metta is linked to the way things are. It's not just, for example, we could be humanists and agree that metta is a good idea. to live with kindness is surely, most people would agree with that. But as Buddhists, it's also linked to wisdom, and wisdom is linked to seeing how things are. So it's a metta is part of the way things are. If we could really see how things are, what life is, who we really are, metta would be the natural response. Empathy would be the natural response. It wouldn't be something that we have to consciously practice. It would just arise. And sometimes for us it does just arise. Sometimes either when we're meditating or in our life off the cushion, we just get a spontaneous sense of connection, and metta is the only response. Sometimes it arises, I think it can arise at times of crisis, when things are falling apart, when our normal sort of structures that hold our identity in place start to shake or break. One of the consequences that can happen, particularly if you've been practicing, is that the heart opens. It's like life falls apart and the heart opens. It can happen. I'm not saying that suffering is a good thing, but we can make some meaning out of our dukkha. We can create something from pain. Elizabeth Bishop, in this poem, One Art, the refrain is, "The art of losing isn't hard to master." She just had a completely tragic life. Her father died when she was 8 months old. Her mother went mad when she was 5 years old. She was shunted around from family member to family member. Two lovers committed suicide. One of them with great harshness to her. All sorts of things, all sorts of things. And apparently she said in an interview that yes, she'd had a really difficult life, a difficult childhood. She didn't want to dote on it. She didn't dote on her childhood, didn't dote on suffering. But what she does seem to have done is channel it into creating poetry. That's one response of creativity in the response to suffering. I'm suggesting that metta is another one, or maybe metta is part of that. Does that make sense? That out of dukkha meaning can arise. I was reading some quotes from Viktor Frankl. You've heard of Viktor Frankl? Wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And, Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist, and he developed this sort of system where he felt that our real urge was for meaning. And he was a survivor of the Holocaust, had survived, been imprisoned and survived 4 concentration camps, including Auschwitz, and then went on to write this book, Man's Search for Meaning and Practice Psychiatry, and develop this new system. And he was saying that meaning can arise in 3 ways. One is through our work, that we create something meaningful in the world. We do something meaningful in the world. And the second is through connection with people, with life, with other people. Meaning arises in relationship with others. And the third is that meaning can arise through suffering. That suffering isn't something that you wish on anybody, and we don't wish it on ourselves, of course. And yet, of course, it's inevitable. The Dharma tells us that some degree of dukkha is going to be, present in all our lives. If not now, then tomorrow or some point. And how we respond to it is the freedom that we have. We can't always have freedom as to whether to have suffering or not, but our response is our own choice. And Viktor Frankl is saying that you can respond creatively. Bhante says this, and that creates meaning. You can even have, he was saying, our task is to be worthy of our suffering, to become worthy of our suffering. I don't want to sort of unpack that, but I be clear, I'm not trying to ennoble suffering. All I'm trying to say is that there it is there in life. What are we going to do with it? And there is potential to grow from it. And the link for me between all of those things, doing something worthwhile in the world through our work, our relationships and connections with others, and somehow having a creative response to dukkha, making something meaningful out of pain. The link is an open-hearted response to life. For me, that's what links those. It's a creative response to life, and I think creativity needs an open heart. It needs a metaphor heart. So, in a way, if we could just learn to live from more metta, I think we'd live richer lives. I would live a richer life if I could learn to live from more metta. Sort of regardless of what happens, it is the key thing. But yes, I want to also say that it's also the way things are. I find it very exciting that when I'm connected with life, with other people, with meaning, I'm also connected more closely to the nature of reality. That this sense that I normally have of a fixed and separate selfhood is illusory. And if I could only see through that delusion, then metta would be the natural response. Okay, so that's a little bit more about, I didn't mean to say all that anyway, but that's just a little bit more about metta and the nature of things and meaning. So yesterday we were looking then at the metta bhavana practice, and I was encouraging you to experiment with trying the practice without trying to cultivate metta, without the bhavana, without any willed effort, so that we were sort of unlearning the practice and emphasizing particularly a receptive awareness of our Vedana, our sensations in the body, of also what's happening in our heart, and of course a receptive awareness of what's happening in our mind. So just tuning into what our experience is as we bring each person to mind. Yeah. I think all of you were here yesterday, so you get the gist. There were some questions from yesterday's. Today I want to move on and start looking at bhavana again, but I want to see if we can just, if I can respond at least to a few questions from yesterday that I wasn't able to respond to yesterday. Samudra Ghosha sent me a list of those questions, and well, questions and comments. And some of you were saying that you felt metta just spontaneously, naturally arising, and open-heartedness naturally arising. And that's just great. In a way, if that happens, then you don't need to do very much else. What I would suggest is that you, which is probably what you've been doing, you bring awareness to the metta that's already arising. You just turn towards it, not very, not in a sort of hard focus way, but in a gentle sort of glancing way. You bring awareness to what's already happening, and it will grow. You don't have to push it. It will naturally unfold, grow. It's fine. Yeah. So you don't need to then make much effort apart from turning towards it. Yeah. So that's just lovely. Somebody else was saying, look, can we work like this for, every time that we do the Metta Bhavana? And well, I'd say if it's working for you, certainly practice in this receptive way for as long as you need to before you start actively cultivating. So sometimes at the LBC, I've been running courses called Who Hates the Metta Bhavana? And there's 6-week courses. And in those courses, I encourage people to commit to practicing the Metta Bhavana every day, to in a way park the mindfulness of breathing, to commit to a daily meditation practice, and let's do the Metta practice every day. The title, by the way, is slightly cheeky. You don't have to hate the Metta Bhavana to do the course. It was I don't know why it was but it's a good title, I think. And I encourage people to, if they're doing that course, to work in the way that we were doing yesterday, which is just to stay receptive to their experience without any bhavana. I encourage people to do that for 3 weeks, every day. Sometimes it's even a bit longer, but normally it's about 3 weeks to really get used to becoming receptive and the art of staying with our unfolding experience moment to moment, staying with that, and not being too quick to judge it as right or wrong, to develop this process-oriented attitude to meditation that is interested, that is curious, that is playful, to experience unfolding, whatever that experience is. So we do that for about 3 weeks, and then I, as it were, reintroduce how to cultivate metta actively, more actively. These twin, you could say there's twin principles of receptivity and activity. They're present, those principles need to be present in any meditation practice, receptivity and activity. Sometimes, depending on the meditation, one is emphasized more than the other. But what I've been finding is that for many of us, the principle of receptivity can get forgotten in the Metta Bhavana practice. And so this is a corrective to that. Yeah? It's not the whole practice, which of course would include bhavana, but it's a useful corrective for many people. So today, when I introduce I'm going to say a little bit more about bhavana. I'm doing that because we don't have 6 weeks together. So for you, if you feel that you need to stay with this receptive awareness for longer, well then do stay with the receptive awareness longer and park what I'm teaching for later. But you will need it later, probably. Yeah. So it might be that you want to carry on with that receptive way of working when we meditate. But I will say a little bit more about bhavana. But also, when we do introduce bhavana, when I introduce bhavana, it's very, very easy, even on a 6-week course, after 3 weeks of just being receptive, it's very, very easy. As soon as I say anything about how to cultivate metta, it's very easy for people to forget the receptive awareness. Very, very easy. It's like old habits kick in, and people are straight away, they bring the friend to mind, the neutral person to mind, whoever, and straight away, without checking in with themselves as to how they are, what their response is, what the body is doing, they straight away start wishing the other person well, and sort of forgetting that we need to start from where we are. So I'd really urge you to not do that. Yeah. I mean, one way to not do that is to get used to, in the 5-stage practice, to get used to starting each stage with a few minutes of just receptive awareness. So you bring the person to mind, yourself, the friend, whatever, the neutral person, the difficult person, and you don't immediately look at cultivating, unless the metta's already spontaneously flowing, in which case, don't try and block it. But if it's not already spontaneously flowing, then let's spend a few minutes checking to see what is there, with each stage. Okay, I'm going to just see if there are any more questions that I want to answer just now. Lots of you talked about crying, which I talked about yesterday, and that's really good. Prakash, you asked about mind watching. I don't know if you're here, Prakash. There you are. About whether this was mind watching. And as Subhuti talks about mind watching in Mind in Harmony, and you're right, it is that, but it's also body watching and heart watching. If by mind you mean the whole of our experience, then yes, but particularly when we meditate, we do need to stay embodied. And what I mean by that is stay aware of sensations in the body. Very, very easy for many of us to meditate, as it were, from the neck up and forget the sensations in the body. And then the well-wishing, when we do cultivate it, is doesn't go very deep. It remains rather conceptual. Yeah. So thanks for that, Prakash. And then a couple of people asked about, I talked a little bit about sending metta to those who have died. And Oscar, are you there, Oscar? I can't see you, but you might be on the other screen. Was asking about whether that wasn't eternalist, like, good. Oscar's just saying he's here. Whether that wasn't eternalist, in that, Buddhism teaches that there isn't an eternal soul that goes to some heaven or hell or purgatory after death and, lives forever. So that's right, Buddhism does say that there is no eternal soul, but it also, so eternalism is seen as a wrong path, a wrong view, but also Buddhism says that nihilism, which is the sort of opposite extreme, is also wrong. Nihilism, in this case, would be defined as there's nothing beyond death, that when the body dies, consciousness is snuffed out. That's also not true. And the way that you might want to think about it, the middle way between eternalism and nihilism is said to be extremely hard to realize, at least to realize with insight. But one way that you could sort of think about it is that there's nothing, even while I'm alive, there's nothing fixed in me. But there is this process of physical processes and what I call sort of psycho-physical processes. There's both. There's a sort of consciousness and physical processes going on. When the physical processes die with the death of the body, or when the mind leaves the body, those psychic processes, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, something of it carries on. Something of it carries on. But it was never a thing. It's very difficult to talk about, because as soon as I say consciousness, I've made it into a noun. It's a noun, it's a thing. So maybe processes is a better way of thinking about it, that something of the processes of what we call consciousness, psychic processes, carry on. And according to the tradition, eventually they find a new form to take birth in. So they carry on. And I believe that they will carry on not in some sort of, sometimes people say that they'll carry on in other people's memories, and, you know, that we live on in others. I don't mean that. I mean something more literal than that, like a person who's died, their consciousness, as it were, carries on in some way or another. Yeah. I don't know if that helps, Oster. So I would urge you, if you are at all open to that, to include people who have died in the Metta Bhavana. People who've died recently, but people who've died, you know, a long time ago as well. You can just wish them well. Okay, so somebody's just asked me a question. Okay, so I'm not going to answer those questions that people are writing on chat just yet, but I'll try and come back to them. Yeah. Mainly because I want to move on to talking about bhavana, and then see if we can meditate before having a cup of tea. So when we want to bhavana, cultivation, which is what it means. Cultivation is a good translation, a good word, because cultivation, when you cultivate something, a plant, Caroline sitting there with orchids behind you. Caroline, it's lovely to see. And when you cultivate something, you can't force growth. You can't. All you do is you water. You provide the conditions. You nurture, and growth happens, as it were, naturally. But we provide the conditions, and you can't force metta in. You can't. You can lay the ground, you can provide the conditions, the water, the sunlight, the soil. So what do I want to say about cultivation? The first thing I think I want to say is that there are lots and lots of different ways of cultivation, and you know many of them. So I'm not going to run through all the ways that you can cultivate metta, or not all of them anyway. What I want to particularly emphasize is that you use cultivation with subtlety, with gentleness and subtlety. You use it sparingly. So, for example, if you are using sentences like, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be free from suffering, may you make progress, if you are using them, then use them really, really lightly, like almost, it's like, see if you can get behind the words to the intention in the words. And if you can get to the intention behind the words, then you might be able to not use the words at all, and it becomes a subvocal intention. Does that make sense? This well-wishing becomes subvocal. If you do want to use words, then be careful that you don't just repeat them like a mantra, maybe, well, maybe, well, maybe, well. It's more like you use the sentences very sparingly and lightly. You drop them in to your consciousness, to your heart, and then you go back to receptive awareness to see what effect those words had. That's true of any method you use. We start with receptive awareness. We cultivate a little bit if we need to, and we might not need to because metta might already be flowing and we just turn towards it. But then we might cultivate for a little bit, and then we go back to receptive awareness, and we alternate until it comes together. So real subtlety and gentleness about cultivation. That's a general point. But the next thing I want to talk about is sort of a way of working that works for me, and I think is good for probably for all of us, is connecting with gratitude. I think if we can connect with gratitude for what I've been given and people who have helped me, gratitude is it's said to be an antecedent to metta. So if I'm in touch with gratitude, it's very, very close to metta. Metta just flows. Does that sound intuitively right to you? Yeah. So then, how do we cultivate gratitude? Bhante says that sometimes when we're not in touch with gratitude, it's because we feel that we haven't been given anything. We've got nothing to be grateful for. And therefore there's no appreciation possible because we just feel that, we haven't been given anything. So if that does feel like how you are experiencing life at the moment, then I'd say try. You've probably done this in other contexts, but try a daily gratitude list. What I sometimes encourage people to do is to, at the end of the day, before they go to bed, write down, keep a diary, keep a journal, just a gratitude journal, and to write down 5 things very, very quickly, not without much thought. So this takes seconds. Write down 5 things that you can feel grateful for that day. And you keep doing that. And if you can't think of anything, then I normally say lower your expectations, lower your standards of what one can appreciate. So you then come down to very basic things like, I'm not starving, I've got food, I've got shelter, I've got warmth. You can come right down to very, very fundamental things, of course, and not everybody does have those things in life, as we kind of well know. I think that can really help. I think it can really help broaden our perspective. I've worked one-to-one with people who have been in crisis of some sort or other, and who start off saying they cannot think of a single thing to be grateful for. Um, um, I've done this with somebody who had cancer, and she was, she started off feeling there was nothing, there was just so much anxiety. Appreciation felt a long way away. But after some time of working like this, it's like the appreciation just started to flow more and more. And I can remember her saying she just felt so grateful for, what were they? Snowdrops coming out in the winter in her garden. And she knew that she might not see snowdrops again. She might not live to another winter. It becomes just a spontaneous appreciative way of living. And if you can, if we can, you might not need to do a gratitude list, but if we can get in touch with what we have been given, then, as I say, metta's not far away. Metta's not far away. So in a moment, we'll do another period of meditation, and I'd like us to just have the emphasis of gratitude. So in the first stage, first of all, we're just going to do receptive awareness. We're not going to do anything other than what we were doing yesterday, and I'll lead us in. And then I'm going to encourage you, if you want to just reflect or bring to mind something that you can feel grateful for, or someone you can feel grateful to. And then in the second stage, when you bring the friend to mind, choose somebody that you can feel some gratitude to. Yeah, it could be, so it might be not who you might normally pick as a friend. Just choose somebody that you can feel grateful to. And then in the third stage, when we come to the neutral person, if you want to, you can reflect on the sort of interconnectedness of all, how we depend on so many neutral people, from our food to our clothing to our shelter to this internet to the fact that we can connect at all, that we live at all, is dependent on millions, billions, possibly neutral people, just like us, essentially just like us. And see if you can start to feel a bit of gratitude there, if you want to. And remember, we're going to work with subtlety, not with not forcing this. We're going to keep coming back to receptive awareness. Now, with the difficult person, it depends how I don't know, how you are with the metta. It might be flowing, and it might be by this stage fine. With the difficult person, it might be more difficult to feel grateful. And yet you can find it. I can find it in my better moments. I once, on a solitary retreat, made a gratitude list of not things, but people that I have given me things in my life. And I can't remember, it was several hundred long by the time I finished. And included in that were people who, had given me a hard time in some way or other. And looking back, and it's easier in retrospect, I can see that I've grown from some of the difficulties. I've had some, when I was working in the corporate world, I had some really, really difficult bosses. 2 or 3 come to mind, and some colleagues that were really difficult. And I do think I've learned from them. I do feel grateful to them. I've had some friendships that have been really, really difficult, and I do think I've grown from them. We've probably all got examples of that. Do you think you might be able to think of somebody that, yes, you wouldn't have wished for the difficulty, but in retrospect, there's been some growth? Yeah. Not unlinked to what Viktor Frankl was saying about dukkha and making meaning out of it, maybe. And then, of course, the world. We'll expand out to the world. So it's a sort of gratitude emphasis in the Metta Bhavana that we're going to try out, and we're going to keep coming back to receptive awareness. We're not going to force it. Now, some of you might not want to do this, and you're welcome to just carry on with that receptive way of working if you want to. Anything else I want to say? No, let's give that a go. Let's meditate, and then we'll meditate. Do you want a little? Oh, do you want a comfort break now? And then let's have a comfort break now, and then we'll come back and meditate. So hopefully we're regathering. So when Vidyasaki is back. Atapriya, I've got two of you. Well, I've got one of you in the flesh, and then Arta Siddhi's little box has a picture of you. The younger you, actually. Oh, and somebody is waiting to come in. Tim's waiting to come in. So Midragoshi, you're letting him in. That's good. Here's Vidyasaki. So Vidyasaki, will you manage questions?
Yep. Oh, there's some arrived already.
Oh, good. And yeah, it can be anything about what we've just done, the practice we've just done, or anything, from today or yesterday. So do just feel free.
Okay, so I'll shall I just sort of repeat how we'll do it? So if you've got a question for Jnanavaca, probably the best thing to do is to put it in the chat box, and then I'll sort of read it out. And if you would like to speak, I will sort of scan, see if anybody's putting their hand up, but it might be easiest just to put something in the chat box. But I do notice that Artapriya has a question, and as it's quite a long one, I'm just going to let you ask it. Is that all right, Artapriya?
Nothing too difficult, Artapriya.
Are you unmuted? You need to unmute. No.
It won't let me.
Oh,
No, I can hear you, Artapriya.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Yeah. I wonder whether you'd say something about the difference between a pleasant feeling and metta. Do you remember that story Bhante told of the rich man who used to do metta every morning, and his servant would bring him some tea? And one day the servant comes in and spills tea over his master, and his master thrashes him because he spoiled his metta bhavana. That
Very
kind of,
isn't it? Very understandable. Yeah, no. Sorry, go on. Do you want to?
Because sometimes it seems like the approach to metta is one of generating pleasant feelings, and metta is more than that, isn't it? And I wonder whether you might draw that out a bit.
Yeah, no, well done. Thank you for asking that. I think you're completely right, aren't you, that there's a distinction between Vedana and karma. Vedana is sensations or feelings, as it's sometimes loosely translated, and we've been I've been encouraging us to stay with a receptive awareness of Vedana, and Vedana, as Attapriya was sort of alluding to, classified as pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. And it's really, really important that we learn to stay with our Vedana without reacting. Normally what happens is that unpleasant feelings, unpleasant Vedana, we push away, and pleasant Vedana we try and grasp after and cling to. So the receptive awareness that I've been talking about is very much about learning to stay with Vedana, whatever is happening, and if they're neutral or whatever. But then Attapriya is quite right that that's not metta. That's a sort of a good mindfulness practice of staying with our experience. Metta is a karma. It's active. It's an intention. It's a volition. It's a conscious well-wishing. And that well-wishing, that active intention, we can cultivate whether the Vedana are pleasant or unpleasant, or neutral. The well-wishing can be there sort of regardless. And Attapriya is quite right to say that sometimes it's easy to mistake pleasant Vedana for metta. And so I might be feeling really happy and there's a sense of well-being in my body. And I think, yeah, that's great. I'm doing lots of metta. But actually, it can just be sukha. It could be sukha, or it could be intoxication. Sukha is a word for happiness, and happiness, you know, we don't. It's not frowned upon. It's great. In fact, an enlightened being is said to be, the consciousness is said to be in bliss, an unimaginable bliss all the time. So sukha is healthy. Or, as I say, there can be a more egotistical kind of happiness, which is more just intoxication. I'm really pleased because I'm well, and sort of don't worry about anybody else. that sort of intoxicated, you know, when things go our way, it's easy to get intoxicated, isn't it? And it's, you know, I'm fine, so don't worry about anybody else. Neither the more healthy sukha nor that intoxication is the same as metta. Metta is based on an empathic connection that we feel for other people, and out of that basis, a sense of active well-wishing. So really important that we draw that distinction, that Attapriya's drawn that distinction and drawn it out of me. And really important that we stay aware of both the Vedana and the metta. Does that make sense? And the Vedana might be quite unpleasant, and yet there can still be positive intention. The Vedana might be pleasant. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's positive intention. So there's a sort of there doesn't have to be a straightforward correlation. And we kind of know that. We can be really upset in our lives. Things might be, you know, a friend of mine, Vidyadhaka, came down with the virus, and fortunately he didn't get it very badly. He was just ill for a few days. And one of the things he was saying is that he felt during his illness really opened up. His heart was really opened up, and he felt very connected with the world, more so than he had been when he was well. And there was lots of metta. So there was unpleasant Vedana in the body of the illness, and even maybe in the mind, there could have been anxiety about how that illness might unfold, but actually what there was metta as well. Does that make sense? So it's really important. But the reason that I've been emphasizing, at least yesterday, staying with a receptive awareness of Vedana, is that when we teach the meditation of the Metta Bhavana, sort of out of necessity, we tend to emphasize the active cultivation of the intention. And perhaps that's how we have to start. But if the receptive awareness of Vedana is forgotten, then, as I was saying yesterday, the cultivation of metta starts sort of in midair. It's not based in where we are. Yeah. Does that? Do you want to add anything, Attapriya?
No, that's good. That's a good answer. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for that clarification.
A question. I sometimes find the fifth stage a bit overwhelming, as the world is so big and complex. Can you suggest anything that would help with this?
Yeah, I thanks for asking that, whoever's asked that. I think sometimes we have to we have an idea that in the fifth stage we have to somehow include everybody and everything living, and that probably is just unrealistic. What I sometimes tend to do is have a very broad brush, imaginative sense of the world, whatever I mean by that. But mainly what I focus on is a sense of radiating my metta, whatever degree there is, in all directions to all beings. Whoever, it's a bit like, you know how the sun radiates light, and whatever comes into the contact with that light is warmed by that light. It's more that imaginal sense that I'm just radiating out in all directions without preference, without bias, without any sort of partiality, and without any limits to my metta. But I don't have to go around. I used to, when I first learned the practice, try and go around the world. My geography is not great, so that was always problematic. But, you know, I used to still go around the continents. But these days, I think I just try and radiate out. Sometimes I might bring to mind people who are in states of suffering, particularly. But actually, you don't want to necessarily even limit your metta to those suffering. It's just completely, impartial and unlimited. And you can have a sense of that. You know, it depends how long you're meditating for as well, doesn't it? How much reflection you can do. But my own sense is that the metta practice isn't so much about reflection as this intention that can be non-verbal, that is for all life, wherever it is. It's more like if we do that, then there's a sense that anybody that we come across, there will be that well-wishing for. I don't know if that helps, but you don't have to, as I say, think of people in every country or in every state of being. But if you mean overwhelming in terms of sometimes it's possible to bring to mind suffering and then get overwhelmed by the magnitude of the suffering in the world. And if that happens, then you can ease off if it feels like you're getting overwhelmed. You can ease off and come back to oneself and then work more gently. And remember that, yes, there's suffering, there's dukkha, but that's not the only aspect of human existence. There's also love and joy and beauty and meaning.
Perhaps related to that, there's a question from Stephen. He says, compassion seems to be prevalent in metta practice, such as the image of Avalokiteshvara and suffering being the theme of the Four Noble Truths. Is there a danger of mudita and upekkha being overlooked, and how might we naturally connect with those aspects of metta within the metta bhavana practice?
Okay, great. Who was that from, Lydia?
Stephen Powell.
Stephen. Hi there, Stephen. So some of you may not know those words, mudita and upekkha. And very briefly, there are three other practices as well as the metta bhavana, but they're all based on metta. So it's said that when metta encounters suffering, it turns into karuna, which is usually translated as compassion. But I was yesterday, remember, saying it's more like a sense of solidarity. But anyway, karuna. When metta encounters somebody who's for whom there's happiness and things are going well, then it turns into a sort of sharing of that joy. There's a natural gladness in somebody else's gladness. That's what metta, that's how, rather than a sort of envy of their gladness and the happiness, there's a sort of happiness that they're happy, which is called mudita. And then there's this more mysterious quality of upekkha, which is much more, it's more like a wisdom practice where you realize that people are sometimes happy, there's sometimes sadness, but there's joy and pain in life. Sometimes they're woven very fine, and that this is part of conditioned existence, that conditioned existence will include both joy and pain, loss and gain. There's just this sense of this is part of the way things are. Conditioned existence, human existence is like this. And what can arise from that sort of reflection is a new quality called upekkha, which is sometimes translated as equanimity. Not a great translation. I'm not going to go into what equanimity really is, but just to say it's very, very positive. It's not indifference. It's an extremely positive quality of both empathy for whatever arises in somebody else, but also a perspective that is more like a wisdom perspective that sees that this is the nature of life. Now, Stephen was asking if in practice, in his practice or in one's practice, there's an emphasis on karuna, on compassion, on suffering, then is there a danger that the other qualities of mudita and equanimity or upekkha are overlooked? I'd say don't worry about it. I'd say that all of them arise from metta. So your metta might be one day coloured by karuna, or another day coloured by mudita. Upekkha probably has to arise more consciously, but if we just focus on well-wishing, on empathy, on connection, on gratitude, on and this intention of well-wishing, then the other Brahma Viharas, as they're called, will take care of themselves. You don't have to worry that one will get neglected. Yeah, metta is the foundation. But they will, at different times, take on different colours. It's like beautiful colours. if your heart is full of metta and you meet somebody who's really joyous because something's really beautiful happened for them, if your heart's full of metta, mudita will naturally arise. You don't have to force it.
Mm-hmm. So Artapriya has another question, so I'm going to unmute him.
Hello again, sir.
Hello again. I remember years and years ago on my ordination course, Vasantra had said that he'd stopped doing the Metta Bhavana because he thought it was covered by his sadhana practice. And so this might be quite relevant to order members, but it might have more general interest as well. In his sadhana practice, he kind of loved all beings, but he realized actually that when it came down to individual beings, that was the problem.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was fine loving all beings because it was so generalized. And he took a vow to do the Metta Bhavana every day for a year because he felt the neutral person and the difficult person really exercised something in him that needed to be strengthened.
Well, I think
you got any thoughts on that?
yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, and I think that what immediately comes to mind is that I think the Metta Bhavana practice is incredibly rich, and one can practice it at lots of different levels. So one aspect of the practice is that it's a transformation practice of our greed and our hatred. And if we, in that fourth stage where we bring a difficult person to mind, if we are honest with ourselves and really allow time for this receptive awareness to, if we stay with our experience honestly, then we're probably going to get in touch with some feelings that are painful: hurt, anger, resentment, ill will of some sort. And then if we can stay with that without reacting, if we can stay with the actual experience without pushing it away, and cultivate well-wishing, perhaps based on this sort of gratitude or other reflections, then there's an opportunity for the energy of the ill will, the hurt, the resentment, the difficult emotion. There's an opportunity for it to actually be transformed. It's an alchemical practice, a magical practice. Remember that we're not trying to, on the one hand, bury our anger, ill will, hurt. We're not trying to ignore it, nor are we trying to indulge it and give vent to it. So the sort of dharmic way, you could say the tantric way, is the way of transformation. So that can only happen on the basis of, first of all, getting in touch with it, deliberately provoking it, you could say, and then letting it burn you away, letting the fire of that ill will, holding that fire, containing it. And if you've been, I mean, this is my experience, that if I'm in touch with anger, sometimes that's very close to love. There's a lot of energy, emotional energy. And if I'm skillful with it, it can turn into love. You can feel that happen. Or if I'm in touch with craving, that's sometimes very close to an open-hearted shraddha, a response of faith and devotion. It's like the craving the desire has become egocentric and about me wanting whatever I want. But that desire can also be turned into, as it were, a longing for the Buddhas, for the truth. So do you see, there are ways of transforming our so-called negative energies and emotions of craving and desire, and the Metta Bhavana practice can be that sort of transformative practice, like a tantric practice. and I think what you're getting at, Artapriya, and recounting what Vasanta was getting at, is that if we just I don't know, move to that fifth stage too quickly, or if we avoid this working with our difficult emotions, then the metta can be very general, but possibly not so transformative. Yeah, it can remain, our deeper, darker emotions can remain untouched by a more general well-wishing. As long as nobody gets in my way, yeah, I wish you well. Yeah, sort of. Does that make sense? So the Dharma practice, Dharma is more radical than that. It's saying, no, let's be prepared to work with difficult situations, difficult emotions, difficult people, because we really want to transform from a radical basis. We really want to completely uproot our greed and our hatred. And then the Metta Bhavana can also be an insight practice. You can also bring in wisdom reflections, this sense that really this notion that there's a real me cultivating a real thing called metta for a real you is based on concepts that they don't really hold water. Maybe I won't go into that too much, but there is a way of, Vasanta in fact teaches it, of unhooking. Particularly you can do this in the fifth stage. If the metta's flowing, you can let go of a sense of that it's you cultivating metta. There is just metta flowing. Then you can let go, if you want to, of a sense of it flowing towards other beings as really fixed and separate entities. We don't know what beings are, and we don't really know who we are. So there's this mysterious experience of connection, of love, of empathy, of well-wishing, that to call it me and you is to somehow falsify it. And then you can even let go of the notion of well-wishing, of metta. All notions, all conceptual notions, and there is just this, whatever there is. So you can bring some insight reflections to it as well. It can turn into an insight practice. But I think what Artapriya was getting at is that it can be a transformational practice, particularly if you're committed to going for refuge. I think, when we teach it often at an introductory class, people approach it from the angle of well-being, and metta does have that effect, of course. It will increase our well-being, hopefully. Well, I'm sure it does. But I think as people who are going for refuge, who are striving for really a real meeting of the three jewels, I think we want to work with more radical, transformative things. So we're not trying to avoid our hatred and our craving. The Metta Bhavana even can be, particularly with hatred, a real practice to transform it. Yeah. But just to maybe finish on that, Sotan Sadhana. So it depends how in sadhana you're encountering it. So for example, when I do my sadhana, which is my main practice, before doing the formal sadhana, I've been doing reaction practice, which is something that Subhuti has coined. It's a term that he's coined, where I deliberately bring to mind something difficult, dukkha, some sort of dukkha in my experience that is current. So that could be craving or hatred, or on either of those spectrums, but some dukkha, some person, some encounter, whatever it is. And then I bring that to mind. I'm not going to be able to teach reaction practice. We don't have time, but I'll just give you a wee snapshot. I bring the situation or the person to mind and deliberately, as it were, stir the pot of the difficult emotion, and then let go of the narrative and stay with the painful Vedana that has now stirred up. And I try and let go of any sense of blame or whatever, staying with those painful emotions. And then when I really go into them, I try and see that there's really, all that I'm doing is based on an idea of me. These painful emotions are arising because I'm defending a sense of myself that is based on a delusion. Or I might, for example, see that this painful experience of ill will or craving, or whatever it is, it works better with ill will, actually, this practice, I think, for me anyway. So let's stick with ill will, resentment, hurt, whatever it is. That all there is Vedana, and maybe there's stories, but Vedana don't have any substantial existence. They're just currents of energy passing through. Stories, they're just concepts in the mind. They're just thoughts. Thoughts don't have any substantial existence. What else can I find? A sense of me, but yeah, that's based on a delusion. This really unpleasant experience is empty of any intrinsic selfhood or substance. So I bring that to my, I do that practice, or I try and do it for a little bit every day before my sadhana. Because I don't know if Vasandra was getting at this, but if I don't do that, I'm quite capable of bypassing my difficult experiences. And I'm quite capable of having a very pleasant experience in meditation. Even not just a pleasant experience that's superficial, but even a sense of real metta and shraddha, but that has somehow ignored the dukkha. Yeah. So not ignoring our pain, but working with it creatively, finding a way to do that, being honest with it. That's part of this practice, and you can bring a wisdom perspective to it if you want to. So a lot that came out of that, Artapriya. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's, yeah.
We've got maybe time for one or so more. Well, let's see.
Well, there's a couple.
Okay,
so one is there a difference between social action and our Buddhist practice in contributing to transforming the world? Is there a difference between social action and our Buddhist practice?
Well, you see, social action, thanks for asking that. Social action might be part of our Buddhist practice, or it might not. There are lots and lots of social activists who wouldn't be Buddhists, aren't Buddhists, and for them it wouldn't be part of their Buddhist practice. So for us, if we are active socially, and hopefully we're all contributing, whether we call it activism or not, hopefully we're all contributing some sort of friendliness, kindness, positive contribution to the world, and that is really important. But if by social activism you mean what I think we normally mean by activism is campaigning for some sort of change in society, whatever it is, from animal rights or climate change or whatever it is, if that's what you mean, then it can be part of our practice if we're really working on our mental states at the same time as trying to change the world. And for me, actually, no, there's two things. One is that we need to be working on our mental states and making sure that any tendency to anger or righteous indignation or hatred is worked with, and not allowed to be indulged. Because in those activism circles I used to the trustee for a sort of activist campaigning organisation in London, and they used to encourage anger as a motivation for change, and that's not a Buddhist response. Anger might arise, but we do need to check that it doesn't turn into hatred or ill will. Does that make sense? Or righteous indignation. So social activism needs to, from a dharmic perspective, we need to be working on our minds and transforming those tendencies if they arise. The other thing that I think we need to, I believe, and this is more of a moot point, but so you may disagree with me, and we probably haven't got time to discuss it. I believe that as Buddhists, particularly if you're in this country in the UK, which has generally liberal democratic, it has a general liberal democratic structure, that our activism, I believe, should stay within the law. I think it would be a shame if we think that activism gives us a right to bypass or undermine our legal system. That's my own view. I think it would be different if we didn't have a liberal democracy, and the laws were, I grew up I grew up in a blissfully suburban area of North London, but it was at the time of apartheid, and I can remember campaigning for the lifting of apartheid, and in South Africa. And if the regime is like it was there, then there might be, I think, justification for breaking the law. But then I would say it has to be in a non-violent way, if it's part of our Buddhist practice. So non-violence is the sort of bottom line. Trying to stay within the law, I believe, if you can, in a liberal democracy, because I think we're fortunate to have a liberal democracy, and we want to strengthen that, not undermine it. That would be my view anyway. And definitely working on our own mental states. Yeah. But really good, because there's a danger. So some people, this isn't a danger for some people, obviously, and probably not for the questioner. But there is a danger for some of us in the West practicing Buddhism to veer towards passivity, a certain way of practicing which becomes just all about me and my health and well-being. And that can't be the Dharma. We do need to work on trying to transform the world around us in whatever ways we can. At the same time, another sort of related point, sometimes I've met people who say, I've lived and worked at the LBC for many years, and sometimes people say, why doesn't the LBC do more to help transform the world? And on the one hand, I completely agree that I think it'd be great if we can be doing more. But if underlying that question is an assumption that by teaching the Dharma and the Metta Bhavana in this case, we're not contributing to the transformation of the world, then that's the wrong assumption. Yeah, the Dharma and meditation in a dharmic context, or even in a secular context, is a real contribution to the transformation of the world. Because when we say the world, we do normally we mean individuals, we mean people. Yeah. Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent from the question.
So, well, we've got about 5 minutes left. So I think there's one more question.
Why don't we ask it?
Yeah. So this is from Sarvajit. If during the 4th stage you generate metta for someone who continues to take advantage of that goodwill, how do you overcome that ongoing feeling of resentment?
Yeah, yeah, indeed. Well, I think this is a really tricky one, and I've had experiences of trying to work with both feeling goodwill towards somebody and having to be quite canny about boundaries, intelligent about boundaries, because some people might take advantage of goodwill. So you can do both. Do you see what I mean? You can. Metta isn't without intelligence and an intelligent awareness of the situation and the person or the other person. So we do need to bring that in. So it's not just about letting other people take advantage of us. It's not that at all. I think we can be boundaried. We can be quite strong in our boundaries. We can say, we can choose how we want to, how much we want to go along with, because nobody can take advantage of us if we don't allow it. At least usually, if you see what I mean. In fact, no, they don't. They can't. They might be able to do to us things physically, you know, they can imprison us or whatever, I don't know. But they don't have to mentally take advantage of us if we don't allow it. And I believe it is possible to be really strongly boundaried and have goodwill, to wish them well. And I think it's a really tricky balance, that I can find myself sometimes going from one to the other. Like, I open my heart to somebody and then I think, oh, but they're going to take advantage of that, and they might. Or I re-establish a boundary, which in some cases might just be, I'm not going to contact this person. Yeah. But what you don't then want is the heart to close down. So really tricky. That's part of the, I don't know, the magic of this practice is that it doesn't have easy answers, because life isn't easy. And but this practice is always relevant in whatever situation. To go back to Viktor Frankl, you know, he comes out with such dharmic things. One of the things that he says, and I haven't got a quote, unfortunately, to read you, so I'll paraphrase, but one of the things he says, which is pure Dharma, which is that nobody can take away the freedom of how to respond in a situation. Nobody can. That is our freedom. They can take away everything else. And of course, he survived Auschwitz and other concentration camps. They can take away everything else. But our freedom to respond in our minds and our hearts is the last freedom, and maybe the only freedom that we have. And nobody can take that away. Nobody. Yeah. But we might have to be boundaried.